kind of worthless junk did you give me?" my father said. And then he slapped me, in front of 30 guests holding champagne glasses, on the night of his 55th birthday, in a house I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees since sunrise. I ran out the front door with nothing but a backpack and a bruise on my cheek. I didn't know it then, but that slap was the last thing Gerald Talbot would ever do to me. Because by midnight, I'd be sitting in a black SUV across from a stranger who'd say 5 words that would unravel 18 years of lies. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. My name is Hillary, though for most of my life, I was forced to answer to Allison. I'm 21. Now, let me take you back to that Saturday morning, the day Gerald Talbot turned 55, and the last day I spent under his roof. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. that morning, same as every Saturday. Except this Saturday came with a 2-page handwritten list Donna had left on the kitchen counter the night before. Sweep the patio. Arrange the folding chairs, 32 of them, one for each guest on Gerald's list. Press the tablecloth. Slice the lemons. Wash the Pottery Barn serving platters by hand because the dishwasher leaves spots. Their house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in Henrico County, Virginia, a 4-bedroom colonial with a manicured lawn Gerald hired someone to mow, but told the neighbors I did. Inside, the dining table was solid oak, seats 12, polished weekly by me. On the counter, 2 cases of Napa Valley Cabernet and a 3-tier cake from a bakery that charged more for fondant than I earned in a week. My room was downstairs, not the finished basement, the storage closet next to the water heater. No window. A twin mattress Gerald had pulled from a curbside pile when I was 9. A wool blanket that smelled like damp cardboard no matter how many times I washed it. Megan's room was upstairs. Queen bed, flat screen, a vanity mirror ringed with those Hollywood bulbs. She was 23 and still lived at home. Still had her credit card linked to Gerald's account. Still hadn't learned how to boil an egg because that was what I was for. I'd spent 3 months saving for Gerald's gift. A leather wallet, real leather, from a department store downtown. $84, which doesn't sound like much unless you're earning $11 an hour scrubbing sheet pans at a restaurant called Rosie's off Route 1. I wrapped it in craft paper because I couldn't afford a gift bag. I didn't know, standing there in that kitchen at 5 in the morning with flour on my hands, that the wallet would be the last thing I ever gave that man. Gerald came downstairs at 10. Polo shirt. Ralph Lauren, the one with the big pony logo. Powder blue. Khakis creased like knife edges, cologne so thick it reached me before heated. He walked the patio like a general inspecting his troops, moved one balloon cluster 6 inches to the left, stared at the lemon slices I'd arranged on the water pitcher and said, without looking at me, "They're uneven. Do them again." Donna appeared at noon. Hair blown out, pearl studs, a linen dress from Ann Taylor she'd ordered online and made me steam. She inspected the kitchen, ran a finger along the countertop, and whispered something to Gerald I wasn't supposed to hear but did. "She only got you something cheap. Just brace yourself." Megan showed up last, because of course she did. New dress, new highlights, new heels clicking across the floor I'd waxed at 6 a.m. She handed Gerald an Apple Watch, the Series 9, stainless steel, the one that retails for $700. She'd charged it to the supplementary credit card Gerald gave her for emergencies. Gerald opened it, beamed, and kissed her forehead. "This is my girl," he told the first guests walking through the door. He had his arm around Megan. "She always knows what her old man likes." He didn't look at me. He never did when other people were watching. I was the girl who carried trays, refilled glasses, wiped condensation rings off the coffee table before they could set. When one of the guests, a woman from Gerald's office, asked Donna, "Shouldn't Allison sit down and eat with us?" Donna smiled the way she always smiled, warm as a closed door, and said, "Oh, she likes to help. It's her way of showing gratitude. You know how it is with adopted ones." I kept carrying trays. It happened during the gift opening. Gerald sat at the head of the table like it was a throne. 30 guests arranged around him. Neighbors, church friends, a few co-workers from the insurance agency he managed. Champagne flutes catching the patio string lights. Megan perched on the armrest of his chair, filming on her iPhone. Donna stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, radiating the image of a woman who had everything figured out. I came forward with the craft paper package. I'd written on the front in my neatest handwriting, "Happy birthday." Allison. Gerald took it, weighed it in his hand. I remember thinking he might actually smile. He smiled sometimes, when no one could accuse him of going soft. But then he tore the paper, pulled out the wallet, flipped it open, flipped it closed, and held it up like evidence at trial. "What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" His voice cut through the chatter. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. Someone set down a glass too carefully. I started to explain. "I saved up for 3 months." 3 months? And this is all you got?" He stood. The chair scraped the flagstone. "Even the dog gets better treats." And then he hit me. Open palm, right across the left side of my face. The sound was sharp and flat, the kind that doesn't echo because it doesn't need to. My head snapped sideways. A champagne flute fell off the table and shattered on the patio floor, and for a second that was the only sound in the world. No one moved. Donna looked down at her plate. A man from Gerald's office studied his napkin. Megan bit her lip and kept filming. One person stood. Ruth Kessler, the next-door neighbor, 70 years old and 5 feet tall. "Gerald, that was uncalled for. Stay out of my family business." Ruth sat back down, but she didn't look away from me, and I have never forgotten that. I stood there with the taste of copper on my tongue and a wallet on the ground between us, and I thought, that slap will be the best evidence the lawyers need. I didn't understand that thought yet. I wouldn't understand it for hours, but something inside me had already started counting. I didn't go back to the party. I went to the storage closet, pulled the Jansport backpack off the nail on the wall. Faded navy, fraying at the zipper, the only thing that had followed me from high school, and packed what I could. 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans without holes, a toothbrush, a phone charger. The envelope I'd found in the bottom of a box Gerald threw out last spring, the one with a state logo I didn't understand yet, and from inside a shoebox under my mattress, $340 in cash, mostly 1s and 5s, tip money from Rosie's that I'd hidden because Gerald checked my bank account, $340, a backpack, a bruise already blooming purple on my cheekbone. That was everything I owned in this world. I walked through the living room on my way out. The party had resumed. Gerald was laughing at something someone said, champagne in hand, the wallet nowhere in sight. Megan was showing guests something on her phone, probably the video. Donna stood at the window and watched me cross the front yard. She reached for the curtain and pulled it shut. Nobody called my name. Outside, the October air hit my face and the sting on my cheek flared like a second slap. Henrico County at 9 p.m. is dark. Not city dark, where there's always a bodega lit up on the next corner, but suburb dark, where the streetlights are spaced far apart and the silence between houses feels deliberate. I walked along Patterson Avenue. No destination, just a way. Behind me, the music from the party got softer and softer until it was just bass notes and then nothing at all. I'd made it maybe 2 miles when headlights slowed behind me. A black Cadillac Escalade, clean tinted windows, Virginia plates. It rolled to a stop 10 feet ahead. The rear door opened. And I should have run. Every instinct said run. But I was already so tired of running from things, I thought. Maybe just this once, I'd see what was running toward me. A man stepped out first. Mid-50s, tall, lean, wearing a charcoal peacoat I'd later learn was Brooks Brothers. Not flashy, just the kind of coat that fits like someone measured you for it. His hair was dark brown threaded with silver, and his eyes, hazel green, wide set, catching the streetlight, were the exact same eyes I saw in my bathroom mirror every morning. Behind him, a woman. Shorter, red-haired, sharp-featured, carrying a leather portfolio like she'd just left a courtroom. She kept her distance, professional, watchful. The man's hands were trembling. I could see that even in the dark. "I'm sorry to frighten you," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. "My name is Richard Whitford, and I believe I am your biological father." I took a step back. My shoulders hit a mailbox post. "That's not possible. My biological parents didn't want me, that's what I was told." "You were told wrong." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a photograph. Small, creased at the corners, clearly handled 1,000 times. A woman holding a toddler. The woman had auburn hair and cheekbones like mine, and a smile that leaned slightly to the left. The toddler had hazel green eyes. "Her name was Catherine," he said. "She was your mother. She died in a car accident when you were 2, and I have spent every single day since then trying to find you." I looked at the photograph, then at him, then at the photograph again, because the woman in it had the same mouth I did, the same tilt of the head, and looking at her felt like finding a word you've been searching for your whole life. The red-haired woman spoke. "My name is Margaret Hale. I'm Mr. Whitford's attorney, specializing in family law. We're not here to take you anywhere you don't want to go. We've been monitoring your situation through legal channels for several months. Tonight, when our investigators saw you leave the house, we made the decision to approach." "You were watching the house?" Margaret nodded. "The birthday party. Many guests. It was the safest opportunity to confirm your identity visually." She paused. "We also saw you run." I touched my cheek without thinking. The bruise pulsed under my fingertips. Richard Whitford looked at the mark on my face, and something behind his eyes broke very quietly. We sat in the back of the Escalade. Richard on one side, me on the other, Margaret in the front passenger seat with her portfolio open. The engine was running, the heat on low. It was the warmest I'd been all night. Richard told me the story like a man who'd rehearsed it for 18 years and still wasn't ready. Catherine died on I-64 eastbound on a Tuesday morning in March. A delivery truck crossed the median. She was killed instantly. Richard was in the passenger seat. Shattered pelvis, collapsed lung, 4 months in the hospital. Hillary, me, was at home with a neighbor. "While I was in the ICU," he said, "Child Protective Services placed you in emergency foster care. Standard procedure when there's no available parent." I understood that. What I didn't understand was why, when I got out of the hospital and filed to bring you home, they told me I couldn't. A social worker named Leonard Grubb handled the case. Grubb told the family court that Richard had signed a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights, a legal document surrendering custody permanently. Grubb presented the court with a signed form. The judge approved the adoption. "I never signed anything," Richard said. "I was on a ventilator. I couldn't hold a pen, let alone read a legal document. But the court had a piece of paper with my name on it, and that was enough." By the time Richard hired a lawyer and challenged the ruling, it was too late. The adoption had been finalized. The file was sealed. His daughter had a new name, a new family, a new life somewhere in Virginia that he wasn't allowed to know about. "So I hired investigators," he said. "Year after year. It doesn't matter what I spent. I would have spent everything." His voice didn't waver when he talked about the money. It wavered when he said the word, everything. "Leonard Grubb," I said. "How much did they pay him?" Richard looked at Margaret. Margaret closed her portfolio and said, "That's what we intend to prove in court." The SUV was still parked on Patterson Avenue, hazard lights blinking amber against the dark. I sat with my backpack on my lap, clutching the straps like a kid on the first day of school, and I told them about the envelope. Last spring, Gerald had decided Megan needed a yoga studio in the house. That meant clearing the storage closet, my room, and moving my things to an even smaller corner by the furnace. He threw most of my belongings into a garbage bag and tossed it by the curb. I went through the bag before the trash truck came, because that's what you learn to do when nothing you own is safe. You check, and you save what you can. At the bottom of a water-damaged cardboard box, underneath old report cards and a Ziploc bag of baby clothes, I found a manila envelope. Official-looking. The return address had a seal and the words, Virginia Department of Social Services. Inside was a single document, partially redacted, with the heading, Title 4, E-Adoption Assistance, Monthly Disbursement Summary. And across the top, typed in plain government font, Allison G. Talbot. I didn't know what Title 4E was. I didn't know what a disbursement summary meant. But I knew my name was on a government document that Gerald had never shown me, so I folded it up and put it in my backpack. I'd been carrying it for 6 months without understanding why. I pulled it out now and handed it to Margaret. She unfolded it under the dome light, and I watched her expression change. Not dramatically, but the way a poker player's face changes when the final card flips. "This is the adoption subsidy record," she said. "The state of Virginia has been paying Gerald and Donna Talbot approximately $810 per month for your care and maintenance for 18 years. She looked at me. "That's roughly $175,000. How much of it did you ever see?" I thought of the mattress from the curb, the blanket that smelled like cardboard, the closet with no window. "None," I said. Richard turned his face toward the window, and in the reflection of the glass I could see him pressing his jaw shut so hard the muscle jumped. "All those years," I said, half to myself, "he called me a burden. But I wasn't a burden. I was a paycheck." Margaret drove us to a Hilton off Broad Street. Not the Talbot house, not a shelter. Just somewhere clean and quiet and safe. Richard checked us in under his name. Separate rooms, adjoining door, and the first thing I did was stand in the middle of mine and not know what to do. The bed had white sheets that smelled like detergent instead of mildew. There was a window. I opened the curtains and just looked out at the parking lot lights for a long time, because looking out a window from my own room was something I hadn't done in years. While I stood there, the memories came in layers, the way water rises, steady and cold. I started cooking the family meals when I was 10. Gerald said it was to teach me responsibility. By 12, I was doing all the laundry, all the dishes, all the grocery shopping on foot because Gerald wouldn't drive me. Megan got a Toyota Camry for her 16th birthday. I got a bus pass that expired after 1 month because nobody renewed it, so I walked an hour and a half to Rosie's for my shifts. Gerald never let me keep my own documents. No birth certificate, no social security card, no state ID. When I asked for a driver's license at 17, he said, "What for? You don't have anywhere to go." At the time, I thought he was right. Now I understood he'd designed it that way. I kept thinking, why did Gerald keep me all those years if he despised me? Why not just send me back into the system? If I was so worthless, why hold on? Now I had the answer. $810 a month. That's why. Have you ever met someone who hated you but refused to let you leave? Someone who made you feel like garbage but held on to you like you were gold? If you have, tell me in the comments. Because I think you already know what that math looks like. Donna's voice echoed in my head the way it always did, sweet and sharp as lemon juice on a cut. "Gratitude, Allison. That's all we've ever asked for. Is that really so hard?" "No, Donna. What was hard was realizing I'd been grateful to people who were stealing from me. Let me go back 2 weeks. Before the party. Before the slap. Before any of this. Because the truth is, Gerald had already shown me who he was. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. It was a Tuesday evening. Gerald called me into his home office, the room no one entered without permission. Mahogany desk, leather wingback chair, a shelf of hardcover books he'd never read, arranged by color. He was sitting behind the desk like a judge, a manila folder open in front of him. "Sit down," he said. "Not have a seat. Sit down." He pushed a document across the desk. 10, maybe 12 pages, dense print, a blue signature tab sticking out from the bottom. "This is a voluntary agreement," he said. "It states that you choose to remain under my guardianship because you are not financially or emotionally prepared to live independently. Sign it." I picked it up. Most of the language was impenetrable, whereas the dependent acknowledges that independent living presents undue financial and psychological risk. But one clause on page 4 I understood perfectly. The agreement authorized Gerald to continue managing all state and federal benefits associated with the dependent's care. He wanted me to sign over my own subsidy. Again. This time voluntarily, with my adult signature, so he could keep collecting even after I aged out of the system. "Why do I need to sign this?" I asked. Gerald's expression didn't change. "Because without this family, you're on the street. You don't have a degree. You don't have savings. You don't even have an ID. So you're going to sign this, and you're going to sign it before my birthday. Consider it your gift to me." I didn't sign. I asked for more time. Gerald said nothing, just closed the folder and placed it back in the desk drawer. Slowly, the way you put a loaded gun in a safe. That's why he hit me at the party. It wasn't about the wallet. It was never about the wallet. It was because I'd told him no for the first time in 18 years and he couldn't stand it. Back at the Hilton, the morning after. I woke up at 5 a.m. out of habit, heart pounding, already running through the chore list in my head before I remembered. There was no list. There was just a hotel room with white sheets and a window full of gray October sky. A knock on the adjoining door. Richard, already dressed, holding 2 cups of coffee from the lobby. He set one on the desk and sat in the chair across the room. Not close, not far, just present. Like he was afraid that if he moved too fast, I'd disappear again. Margaret arrived at 8 with a garment bag. Inside, a pair of new jeans and a cream-colored cashmere sweater, still tagged. "Something clean to wear?" she said, practical as always. I took them into the bathroom and put them on and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. It was the first time in my life I was wearing something that no one else had worn first. When I came out, Richard's eyes went red at the edges, but he didn't cry. He just nodded and said, "Catherine had that same look, like she was deciding whether to trust the mirror." I sat on the edge of the bed and said what I'd been thinking all night. I need proof. Not the photo, not the story. I need a DNA test. If you're who you say you are, the science will back it up. And if you're not, I need to know that too. Richard didn't flinch. "Of course. Margaret's already located an AABB-accredited lab in Richmond. We can go today." No hesitation, no offense, no guilt trip. Just of course. I'd spent 21 years in a house where asking a question was treated as a personal attack. And here was a man who answered like questions were the most natural thing in the world. "I've spent my whole life doing what I was told," I said. "If I'm going to trust you, it'll be because I chose to. Not because I had nowhere else to go." Richard set down his coffee. "That's exactly how it should be." The lab was a low brick building off Carey Street, clean, clinical, fluorescent. A technician in scrubs swabbed the inside of my cheek, then Richard's, labeled the vials, and told us results would take 3 to 5 business days. 5 days. I'd waited 21 years to know who I was. 5 more felt like holding my breath underwater. While we waited, Richard brought things to the hotel. Not gifts, not the way Gerald gave gifts, as transactions with strings attached, but pieces. An album of photographs. Catherine pregnant, laughing on a porch swing, one hand on her belly. Catherine holding a newborn with a pink hat. Richard and Catherine and the baby in front of a brick bungalow in Richmond's fan district with a red door. The baby had hazel green eyes, even then. "That's the house you came home to," Richard said. "I still own it. I couldn't bring myself to sell it." I studied each photograph like it was a document I needed to memorize for a test. My mother's face, her hands, the way she stood, slightly tilted, weight on her left foot, the same way I stand when I'm not thinking about it. "She's beautiful," I said. "You look exactly like her," he said, "especially the eyes." On the 5th day, Margaret called. I was sitting on the hotel bed with the album open to a photo of Catherine blowing out birthday candles when my phone rang. 99.998% probability of paternity, Margaret said. "It's confirmed. Richard Whitford is your biological father." I didn't say anything for a while. I just held the phone and looked at the photograph and felt something crack open in my chest. Not break, not shatter, but open, The way a door opens when someone finally turns the handle from the other side. 99.998%. A number. But for me, it was the first proof in 21 years that I wasn't an accident nobody wanted. Margaret's voice came back on the line, steady and precise. Now, we have enough. The next step is family court. Here's what I learned later. From the court filings, from Ruth Kessler's testimony, from the texts Donna would eventually hand over to Margaret. The morning after the party, Gerald called the Henrico County Police and reported me missing. Not because he was worried, because he was calculating. The officer who responded ran my information and told Gerald what he didn't want to hear. I was 21, a legal adult. If I'd left voluntarily, there was no missing persons case to open. She didn't leave voluntarily, Gerald told the officer. She's mentally unfit. She can barely function without supervision. The officer asked if Gerald had any documentation of that. A diagnosis, a guardianship order, anything legal. Gerald didn't, because I wasn't mentally unfit. I was just controlled. That night, according to Donna's texts, the ones she'd later surrender as evidence, Gerald paced the living room for 3 hours. Donna sat on the couch and typed what he dictated. Gerald. If that girl talks to anyone, CPS, a lawyer, anyone, we're done. Find the adoption file. All of it. The originals. Donna. You said she doesn't know anything. Gerald. She doesn't. But if someone shows her where to look. He knew. He'd always known. The forged signature, the bribed caseworker, the subsidy he'd been collecting for 18 years on a child he treated like hired help. Gerald carried all of it in his head the way some men carry debt. Constantly aware, constantly managing, never once considering that the whole structure might collapse. Gerald wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of what I'd find out once I was free. He didn't know that the man he should have been afraid of, the man who'd spent 18 years and a private investigator's retainer trying to find his daughter, was sitting in a Hilton 20 minutes away, assembling a file 3 inches thick. Margaret spread the documents across the hotel desk like a surgeon laying out instruments. This was the second time I saw the evidence. But this time, it had teeth. Look at this, she said, sliding a photocopied form toward me. It was the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights, dated October 2005. At the bottom, a signature, Richard A. Whitford. Neat, deliberate, slightly forward-leaning. Then she placed a second sheet beside it, a certified report from a forensic document examiner, Dr. Elaine Marsh, who had compared the signature on the relinquishment form to 12 known exemplars of Richard's handwriting. Tax returns, mortgage applications, business contracts spanning 20 years. The pen pressure is inconsistent, Margaret said, pointing. The letter formation in the surname doesn't match any of the exemplars. Dr. Marsh's conclusion, and I'm quoting, is that the signature was produced by a hand other than that of Richard A. Whitford with a high degree of certainty. She let that settle. Then she pulled a third document from the file, a bank record. A personal checking account belonging to Leonard Grubb, the social worker who had handled my case. On October 14th, 2005, 6 days before the adoption was finalized, a deposit of $5,000 appeared. The source, a wire transfer from Gerald R. Talbot's personal account. Not through the church, Margaret said. Not through a charity. Direct, account to account, 1 week before the adoption was approved. I stared at the numbers. $5,000. That's what my entire identity had cost. My name, my father, my childhood, traded for the price of a used car. Richard sat across the room, arms folded, jaw tight. He'd seen these documents before, but watching me see them, that was something different. I could tell by the way he breathed, shallow and careful, like a man trying not to break something by holding it too hard. So the adoption can be undone? I asked. Margaret closed the file. Under Virginia law, an adoption procured through fraud, including forged consent, can be declared void. Yes, it can be undone. 2 days before the court date, a letter arrived at the Hilton's front desk, addressed to me, Allison Talbot, not Hillary Whitford, because Gerald still refused to believe I had any other name. Inside, a single page on Gerald's insurance agency letterhead, handwritten, and a photograph. Me, at 3 years old, sitting on Gerald's lap in the living room of the house on the cul-de-sac, wearing a pink dress I don't remember owning. He was smiling. I was smiling. It looked like a family. The letter read, "Allison, I don't know who this man is or what he's told you, but he is not your father. He is a stranger exploiting a confused young woman. We are your family. We have been your family for 18 years. Come home. We can work this out. I forgive you for leaving." Dad, I read it 3 times. The word forgive hit me differently each time. First like a door opening, then like a lock clicking shut, then like a hand gripping my wrist. He forgave me. For leaving. After he hit me. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and felt the room tilt. 18 years of conditioning doesn't shut off because a DNA test says 99.998%. Somewhere inside me, a voice I'd carried since childhood whispered, "What if Gerald's right? What if this is all a trick? What if Richard just wants something from you too?" I looked at Richard, who was reading in the chair by the window, and said, "How do I know you're not the same as him? How do I know you won't just use me for something else?" He put the book down. He didn't look hurt. He looked like a man who understood exactly why I was asking. "You don't," he said. "Not yet. And I'm not going to try to convince you with words, because words are cheap. The DNA doesn't lie. The documents don't lie. And the court will decide what's true. All I'm asking is that you let the evidence speak." He picked up his book again and went back to reading. And that, the not pushing, the giving me room, was the thing that scared me most, because it was so different from everything I knew. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did what I always did when the world stopped making sense. I looked at the evidence. I took the Title IV-E envelope from my backpack and set it on the desk beside Gerald's letter. 2 documents. One from the state of Virginia, confirming that Gerald received $810 a month to take care of me. One from Gerald claiming he was my family. If Gerald loved me, why did I sleep in a storage closet? If Gerald loved me, why didn't I have a birth certificate, a social security card, a single piece of identification with my name on it? If Gerald loved me, why was the guardianship extension he'd tried to make me sign designed to keep the subsidy flowing, not to keep me safe? The answer was in the math. It had always been in the math. Gerald didn't love me. Gerald invoiced me. I called Margaret at 11 p.m. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting this call. "I'm going to court," I said. "Not because I trust Richard, not fully, not yet, but because I deserve to know the truth. I've earned that. That's all we need," she said. The next afternoon, Derek Simmons came to the hotel. Mid-40s, square-jawed, serious. A social worker with the Virginia Department of Social Services, assigned to review Richard's petition. He asked me about my living conditions growing up. I told him about the closet, the chores, the missing documents, the isolation. He wrote everything down in a small notebook, and when I finished, he didn't say "I'm sorry," or "that must have been hard." He said, "What you're describing, if it's corroborated by the records, constitutes neglect, and the financial component constitutes exploitation of adoption assistance funds." Then he looked at me and added more quietly, "This isn't just about your adoption being fraudulent, Ms. Whitford. This is about a system that was supposed to protect you and didn't." "I'm not choosing Richard over Gerald," I told myself as Derek left. "I'm choosing the truth over the lie I've been living." I didn't witness this part directly. It came out later, piece by piece, through Donna's testimony and the texts she turned over. But I'll tell it the way it happened, because you need to understand who Gerald thought he was walking into that courtroom to face. The night before the hearing, Gerald sat at the dining room table, the same oak table I'd polished every week for 18 years, and rehearsed his testimony with his lawyer. Not Margaret's caliber of lawyer, a general practitioner from a strip mall office who charged by the half hour and had never handled an adoption fraud case in his life. "I have all the paperwork," Gerald said. Signed, sealed, stamped by the court. I've been a member of First Baptist for 22 years. I coach Little League. Everyone in this community knows who I am. Donna, sitting across from him, ventured a question. What about the subsidy envelope? What if they ask about the money? Gerald didn't look up. Nobody audits that. We're fine. Megan wandered through on her way to the kitchen and asked, her voice bored, incurious. The voice of someone whose biggest problem was a slow Wi-Fi connection. If Allison doesn't come back, can I turn her room into a walk-in closet? Gerald didn't answer her either. He was already drafting his opening statement in his head, the one where he'd stand before a judge and explain what a generous, God-fearing man he was for taking in a child nobody else wanted. He didn't know that the judge would be looking at a 3-inch file of forged signatures, bribery records, and a forensic examiner's report. He didn't know that the girl he'd raised to be silent had finally found her voice. He didn't know that the man sitting across the aisle would be the father whose name someone had forged 18 years ago. Gerald walked into that courtroom like a man who had never lost. He was about to learn what losing looked like. The morning of the hearing, Margaret turned the hotel conference room into a war room. She'd reserved a table for 6 and covered it with 5 stacks of documents, each flagged with colored tabs. I sat at one end with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, and she walked me through the case the way a general walks through a battle plan. Calm, precise, leaving nothing to chance. Stack 1, she said, tapping the first pile. DNA results. AABB accredited lab, chain of custody documented, 99.998% probability. Irrefutable. Stack 2. The forensic handwriting analysis from Dr. Elaine Marsh. The signature on the relinquishment form is not Richard's. Her report is 46 pages, but the conclusion is 1 sentence. Stack 3. Financial records obtained through our petition to the Virginia Department of Social Services. Gerald and Donna Talbot received $810 per month in Title IV e-adoption assistance for approximately 216 months. Total, $174,960. Derek Simmons's assessment confirms the funds were not used for your welfare. Stack 4. Derek's full report. Child neglect findings. No medical records after age 14. No personal identification documents in your possession. Living conditions inconsistent with the purpose of adoption assistance. Stack 5. She paused. A sworn declaration from Ruth Kessler, your former neighbor. She's agreed to testify that she witnessed ongoing patterns of unequal treatment and that she personally observed Gerald strike you at the birthday party. Ruth, 70 years old, 5 feet tall, the only person in that backyard who'd stood up. I hadn't spoken to her since that night, but she'd spoken to Margaret, and she hadn't hesitated. Do I have to say anything in court? I asked. Margaret looked at me. Only if you want to. The paperwork speaks for itself. Richard, sitting at the far end of the table, hadn't said a word through the entire briefing. Now he spoke, just once. Whatever happens in there, you already won. You're free. I looked at the 5 stacks on the table. A lifetime of lies, dismantled into tabbed folders. And I thought, no, I haven't won yet. But I'm about to. Richard took me to Banana Republic that afternoon. Not because the clothes mattered, but because, he said, you should walk into that room looking exactly like who you are. Someone who deserves to be heard. I tried on a navy blazer, a white silk blouse, charcoal slacks. Stood in front of the fitting room mirror and stared at the person looking back. She had straight shoulders and clear eyes and looked like someone who might sit at a conference table, not carry trays to one. Your mother used to do that, Richard said when I came out. He was leaning against the wall outside the fitting rooms, hands in his coat pockets. Stand in front of the mirror for a long time, then she'd smile at herself. Just a little, like she'd settled something. I hadn't smiled, but I understood what he meant. Something was settling. On the drive back, Richard pointed to a brick bungalow on a tree-lined street in the Fan District. Red front door, white shutters, a porch swing hanging still in the October air. That's the house, he said, the one in the photos. I looked at it through the window. The house I'd been born into, the house I'd been taken from, and I didn't feel the ache I expected. I felt something quieter, a kind of recognition that sits in the body instead of the mind. That night, the night before the hearing, I sat on the hotel bed and wrote in a notebook I'd bought at the CVS across the street. Not a speech, not a plan, just a line, for myself. No matter what happens tomorrow, I will never go back to that storage room. I will never answer to a name that isn't mine. I will never again be grateful for being used. I slept 4 hours. I dreamed of a red front door opening. Richmond Family Court, a Tuesday morning in late October. The building was old federal brick, columned entrance, hallway floors that echoed every footstep like the building wanted you to know who was coming. I arrived at 8:30 with Richard on my left and Margaret on my right, Derek Simmons a few steps behind carrying a banker's box of records. Navy blazer, white blouse, hair pulled back in a low knot. No jewelry, I didn't own any, but my hands were steady and my back was straight. Gerald arrived at 8:40. Gray suit, burgundy tie, Donna on his arm in her Ann Taylor dress, Megan trailing behind in something too casual for court. His lawyer carried a single file folder. Gerald carried his chin at the angle of a man who believed this was a formality. Then he saw us. His eyes went to me first, registered the blazer, the posture, the absence of the girl who used to stare at the floor. Then they moved to Richard. Then to Margaret. Then to the banker's box Derek was setting on the plaintiff's table. Gerald's face didn't crumble. It recalibrated. I'd seen that look before. The rapid mental arithmetic of a man who controls every variable suddenly realizing there's one he missed. Donna's hand tightened on his arm. Megan pulled out her phone, then thought better of it and put it away. Gerald and I made eye contact across the hallway. For the first time in my life, I didn't look down. The clerk opened the courtroom doors and called the case. In the matter of the adoption of the minor formerly known as Hillary Whitford, now styled Allison Grace Talbot. We walked in, both sides, the same door, different worlds. Margaret stood the way I imagined a scalpel would stand if it could, upright, precise, reflecting light. She addressed the judge, the Honorable Patricia Dwyer, without notes. Your Honor, we are here today to present evidence that the adoption of Hillary Whitford, known for the past 18 years as Allison Grace Talbot, was obtained through fraud. Specifically, the forging of a biological parent's consent to relinquish parental rights, facilitated by a financial payment to the case-assigned social worker. She presented the DNA results first, the lab technician's sworn affidavit, the chain of custody, the number, 99.998%. Judge Dwyer examined the report, adjusted her reading glasses, and set it aside with a small nod. Then Margaret introduced the forensic handwriting analysis, Dr. Elaine Marsh's 46-page report, condensed to its final paragraph. It is my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that the signature on the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights dated October 2005 was not produced by Richard A. Whitford. Gerald's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client has a legally executed adoption decree, approved by this court system nearly 2 decades ago. The petitioner is attempting to relitigate a settled matter based on a hired expert's opinion. Margaret didn't turn around. Your Honor, a decree built on a forged signature is not settled. It is concealed. We are here to unconceal it. I heard Ruth Kessler shift in the gallery behind me. A man I didn't recognize. Later I'd learn he was a courthouse reporter for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, wrote something in a narrow notebook. 2 women from Gerald's church sat in the second row, their faces tight with the particular discomfort of people watching a reputation disassemble in real time. Judge Dwyer looked at Gerald's lawyer over her glasses. The court will hear the petitioner's full presentation. Continue, Ms. Hale. Margaret moved to the financial records, and this was where the air in the courtroom changed. She projected the Title IV disbursement summary onto the courtroom screen, the same document I'd pulled from a garbage bag 6 months ago. Month by month, year by year, a column of numbers running down the page like a ledger of my childhood. Mr. Talbot, Margaret said, The judge had permitted direct questioning. The state of Virginia paid your household $810 per month in adoption assistance for the care of the child placed with you. Over approximately 18 years, that totals $174,960. Can you tell the court how those funds were allocated toward the child's welfare? Gerald straightened in his chair. Everything went to the girl. We fed her, clothed her, kept a roof over her head. 18 years of that isn't cheap. Margaret nodded as though she'd expected this answer, which she had. Then she called Derek Simmons. Derek approached the stand carrying his report like a man carrying something heavy and important. He'd visited the Talbot home. He'd reviewed the records. He spoke without inflection, which made every fact land harder. The child's living space was a converted storage area adjacent to the home's water heater. Approximately 60 square feet, no exterior window, no closet. The mattress showed visible wear and water damage consistent with curbside salvage. I found no medical records for the child after age 14, no pediatric visits, no dental records, no immunizations after 8th grade. The child had no state-issued identification, no social security card in her possession, and no documented access to her own adoption file. He looked at the judge. In my professional assessment, Your Honor, the living conditions described and observed are consistent with child neglect, not with the intended purpose of adoption assistance funds. Donna started crying. Softly at first, then louder. The performed kind of crying that draws eyes. Gerald squeezed her hand and set his jaw, projecting the image of a husband protecting a fragile wife from unfair accusations. But Ruth Kessler was next. She took the stand in a navy cardigan and sensible flats, and she didn't perform anything. I've lived next to that family for 12 years, Ruth said. I watched that girl mow their lawn, wash their cars, hang laundry in the backyard while the other daughter, the biological one, sunbathed on a lounge chair. I never once saw Allison, Hillary, sit at their dinner table when guests were present. And on the night of Mr. Talbot's birthday, I watched him strike her across the face in front of 30 people because she gave him a gift he thought was beneath him. The courtroom was quiet in the way a room is quiet when everyone in it is recalculating what they thought they knew. Margaret waited for Ruth to step down, then turned back to Gerald. Mr. Talbot, do you know a man named Leonard Grubb? Gerald didn't blink. No. Margaret produced a photograph, printed on glossy stock, date stamped in the corner. 2 men standing at a folding table at an outdoor event. One was Gerald, 10 years younger. Polo shirt, paper plate in hand. The other was a thin man with glasses and a Virginia DSS lanyard around his neck. This was taken at the First Baptist Church community picnic in June 2004, Margaret said. 1 year before the adoption was finalized. The man beside you is Leonard Grubb, the social worker assigned to Hillary Whitford's case. Do you still maintain you don't know him? Gerald's jaw worked. I may have met him in passing. Church events are large. I don't remember every face. You remember well enough to send him $5,000. Margaret placed the bank statement on the projector. Gerald's personal checking account. October 14th, 2005. Wire transfer. Recipient. Leonard M. Grubb. Can you explain this payment? That was a donation. For the church's... It was a community contribution. Routed from your personal account directly to Mr. Grubb's personal account? Not the church's account? Gerald turned to his lawyer, who was studying the table surface with the intensity of a man hoping to find an exit there. No objection came. I gave that girl everything. Gerald's voice cracked upward, sharp as a slap. He was standing now, one hand flat on the table. 18 years, a home, food, and this is the thanks I get? Some con man shows up and suddenly I'm the villain? Mr. Talbot. Judge Dwyer's voice was low and final. Sit down, now. He sat, but the room had already heard it, the mask cracking, the entitlement spilling through. In the gallery, the church women stared at their laps. The courthouse reporter's pen moved faster. Margaret turned to the judge with the composure of someone who had just watched her opponent do her job for her. Your Honor, we'd like the court to note Mr. Talbot's characterization of his parental role as something he gave and expects repayment for. That is not parenting. That is a transaction. Margaret looked at me. I'd told her the night before, I want to speak. Not because the case needed it. The documents were enough. But because I'd been silent for 21 years and some things need to be said by the person who lived them. Your Honor, the petitioner's daughter would like to address the court if permitted. Judge Dwyer nodded. You may proceed. I stood. Navy blazer, white blouse, hands at my sides. I looked at the judge, not at Gerald, because this wasn't for him. Your Honor, I'm not here for revenge. The word sat in the air for a moment, and I let it. I'm here because for 21 years I didn't know who I was. I didn't know my own name. I didn't know my mother's face. I didn't know that someone was looking for me, or that the papers that put me in that house were built on a forged signature. I paused, breathed. Mr. Talbot said he gave me everything. Here's what everything looked like. A storage closet with no window. A mattress from someone's curb. No doctor visits after age 14. No identification. No birth certificate. I didn't know my own social security number until 2 weeks ago. I worked in that house from the time I was 8 years old, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, and I was told every day that I should be grateful for it, that without them, I was nothing. My voice didn't break. I'd decided it wouldn't. He slapped me at his birthday party because I gave him a wallet I'd saved 3 months to buy. But the truth is, he slapped me because I wouldn't sign a paper giving him continued control over my life. That's what I was to him. Not a daughter. A line item. I looked at the judge. I'm not asking this court to punish Gerald Talbot. I'm asking this court to tell the truth. Because I deserve at least that. Every child in the system deserves that. I sat down. The room was silent. Ruth Kessler was crying, quietly. The real kind. The courthouse reporter had stopped writing and was just looking at me. Richard sat perfectly still with his hands folded on the table, but I could see the knuckles white. When I stood in that courtroom, I remember thinking, why did it take me 21 years to say something this simple? Have you ever held something inside for so long that when you finally say it out loud, you're amazed it was only a few sentences? That all that weight could fit into so few words? If you know what that feels like, tell me in the comments, because I think that's the kind of thing you can't explain to someone who hasn't carried it. What happened next, no one expected. Least of all, Gerald. Donna stood up, not from the witness stand. She hadn't been called. She stood from the respondent's bench, smoothed the front of her Ann Taylor dress the way she smoothed everything, and said, in a voice that shook like a wire about to snap, Your Honor, I have something I need to say. Gerald grabbed her wrist. Donna, sit down. She pulled free. It was the first time I'd ever seen her pull free of anything. I wrote the check, Donna said. Her mascara was already running, but this wasn't the performed crying from earlier. This was different. Raw, ugly, the kind that doesn't care about an audience. $5,000 to Leonard Grubb. Gerald told me it was to expedite the adoption process. I wrote the check from our joint account, and I knew what it meant. Gerald's lawyer put his head in his hands. Gerald went red from the collar up, a deep mottled crimson I'd never seen on him before. She's lying, Gerald said. She's confused. She's trying to protect herself. I am trying to protect myself. Donna's voice broke high and desperate. Because I've been protecting you for 18 years, and I can't do it anymore. I watched you hit that girl. I watched you work her like a mule. And I didn't say anything because I was afraid of you, Gerald. I was afraid of exactly this. Judge Dwyer let her finish. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. Megan sat frozen in the gallery, phone in her lap, mouth open. Mr. Talbot, the judge said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen a great deal and was still capable of being appalled. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Gerald sat still as stone, and for the first time in my life, I saw him look afraid. Judge Dwyer took 12 minutes to review the final documents. 12 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the courtroom wall, the old analog kind with a second hand that ticks instead of sweeps, and counted every rotation. When she looked up, she didn't address Gerald first. She addressed me. Ms. Whitford. And I will use that name now, because the evidence before this court compels it. The court has reviewed the petition, the forensic handwriting analysis, the financial records, the testimony of the social worker and the neighbor witness, the DNA results, and the statement made voluntarily by Mrs. Talbot. She removed her glasses. The evidence is unambiguous. The voluntary relinquishment of parental rights filed in October 2005 bears a signature that has been determined, by certified forensic analysis, to be fraudulent. The biological father, Richard Whitford, never consented to the termination of his parental rights. The adoption that followed was therefore built on a foundation of forgery and, based on the financial evidence presented, facilitated by a direct payment to the case-assigned social worker. She turned to Gerald. He was sitting rigidly upright, tie still knotted, hands flat on the table. A man holding the posture of authority, while the authority drained out of him. It is the ruling of this court that the adoption of Hilary Whitford, styled as Alison Grace Talbot, is declared void ab initio. The adoption is annulled in its entirety. Gerald didn't move. Furthermore, the court orders Gerald and Donna Talbot to make full restitution of all Title IV adoption assistance funds received, totaling $174,960 to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Donna let out a sound that wasn't quite a word. Finally, this court is referring the matter to the Henrico County District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal charges, including but not limited to forgery in violation of Virginia Code Section 18.2-172, fraud in connection with public assistance, and child neglect under Section 18.2-371.1. The judge set down her papers. The child's legal name is restored to Hilary Whitford, effective immediately. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and the sound of it, that single wooden knock, was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Louder than the slap. Louder than 18 years of silence. It sounded like a lock opening. In the gallery, Ruth Kessler pressed both hands to her mouth. The church women were already standing, gathering their purses, not making eye contact with each other. The courthouse reporter closed his notebook and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Something between respect and sadness. Gerald sat motionless. His lawyer was already packing up, and for the first time I realized that the man Gerald had hired to defend him couldn't get out of that room fast enough. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like floor wax and old radiator heat. I was walking toward the exit with Richard on one side and Margaret on the other when I heard the heels. Fast, uneven, the sound of someone not used to hurrying in shoes that weren't built for it. Wait. Megan. Her makeup was ruined. Mascara tracked down both cheeks. Foundation patchy where she'd wiped at it. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, which was strange because she'd always taken up so much space. I didn't know, she said. She was breathing hard, like she'd been running or trying not to. About the money, the subsidy. I thought Mom and Dad were paying for my school out of Dad's salary. I didn't know it was... She stopped. She couldn't finish the sentence, and I understood why. The sentence ended with your money, and saying it out loud would make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. I looked at her. The girl who'd gotten the Apple Watch, the Toyota Camry, the queen bed, the highlighted hair, the credit card that never declined, the girl who'd laughed when Gerald hit me and filmed it on her phone, the girl who'd asked if she could turn my closet into storage for her shoes. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to walk away without a word. But what I felt, standing there in a courthouse hallway with my legal name restored and my actual father beside me, wasn't rage. It was clarity. I hope you figure out who you are without his money, Megan, I said. I really do. But that's your journey, not mine. She nodded once, and I saw something pass across her face. Not guilt exactly, but the beginning of it. The hairline fracture before the break. Margaret touched my arm lightly. Richard was holding the door open. I walked toward them and didn't look back. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time I had somewhere to walk toward instead of just away from. Gerald was standing at the bottom of the courthouse steps. He looked diminished. Not physically. He was still a big man, still broad in the shoulders, but something structural had given way. His tie was loosened. His suit jacket was unbuttoned. Donna sat in their Buick at the curb, forehead against the steering wheel, engine running. I was halfway down the steps when he said it. The name he'd assigned me 21 years ago, the name a judge had just struck from the record. Allison. I stopped, turned. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was something he owned and couldn't quite figure out the value of. But now there was something else underneath it. Something that might have been fear if Gerald Talbot were the kind of man who admitted to being afraid. After everything I did for you, he said, after 18 years under my roof, this is how you repay me. I stood on the steps in my navy blazer with October sunlight on my shoulders, and I felt, for the first time, the full weight of what he'd just said. Not anger. Recognition. Because even now, even with the judge's ruling still ringing in the air, even with a forensic report proving he'd forged a man's signature to steal that man's daughter, Gerald Talbot believed he was owed something. My name is Hillary, I said, and you didn't do anything for me. You did everything to me, and now it's over. I turned and walked down the remaining steps. Richard was waiting by the Escalade, door open. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just held the door the way you hold a door for someone you've been waiting 18 years to hold a door for. I got in. The door closed. And the last thing I saw through the tinted window was Gerald Talbot standing alone on the courthouse steps, suit jacket hanging open, watching his investment drive away. 6 months later. That's where I am now. I live in Richmond. Not the fan district house with the red door, though Richard offered it. I have an apartment off Gray Street, a studio with tall windows that let in so much morning light, I sometimes just stand there for a minute before starting my day. The windows were the first thing I looked for when I went apartment hunting. I spent 18 years in a room without one. Now I need to see the sky when I wake up. I'm studying for my GED. I'm also enrolled in the culinary program at Reynolds Community College, which is ironic, I know. Gerald made me cook every meal for 18 years, and now I'm choosing it. But that's the difference, isn't it? Between something done to you and something you decide to do. The ingredients are the same. The meaning is completely different. Richard and I have dinner every Sunday at the bungalow. He's not a great cook. His specialty is overcooked salmon and slightly burned garlic bread. But he makes it himself, and he sets the table for two, and he asks me about my week, and listens to the answer. We're not perfect. There are awkward silences. There are moments when neither of us knows what to say, because you can't recover 18 stolen years over salmon. But he's there, every Sunday, without fail. As for the Talbots, Gerald and Donna are awaiting trial. Forgery, fraud, child neglect. The house in Henrico County is under a second mortgage to cover the restitution payment. Gerald was asked to resign from his position at First Baptist's Board of Deacons. He did not go quietly. Donna, who cooperated with the investigation, may receive a reduced charge. Megan moved in with an aunt in Fredericksburg and got a job at a retail store. The first job she's ever had. I go to therapy every Thursday. A woman named Dr. Torres who has a small office with a ficus plant and doesn't tell me how to feel. She just asks questions and lets me find my own answers, which, after 21 years of being told what to think, feels like learning a new language. Healing doesn't happen overnight. Some mornings I still wake up at 5 a.m. with my heart racing, already mentally cataloging chores that no longer exist. But then I open the curtains, and there's the sky, and I remember where I am. I want to be clear about something before I go. This story isn't about revenge. I know it might look that way. The courtroom, the ruling, the restitution order, the criminal charges. But revenge would mean I wanted Gerald to suffer the way I suffered, and I don't. I want him to be held accountable. Those are different things. Revenge is a fire you light hoping it burns someone else. Accountability is just turning on the lights so everyone can see what was already there. If you're in a family where you're tolerated instead of loved, where your presence is endured, not valued, where you've been taught that gratitude means silence and obedience means survival, I want you to hear this. You are not the problem. You were never the problem. The people who made you feel like a burden were carrying their own debts, and they put the weight on you because you were small enough to accept it. You deserve to know your own name. Family isn't paperwork. It isn't a court decree or an adoption file or a signature, forged or otherwise. Family is the person who sits with you while you learn to trust again. The person who says of course when you ask for proof instead of faith. The person who holds the door and doesn't ask you to be grateful for it. Last Sunday, Richard and I sat on the porch of the bungalow on the Fan District Street, the one with the red door. He was drinking coffee. I was reading. Neither of us was talking, and it was the most comfortable silence I've ever known. At one point, he looked over and said, "I'm glad you're here." And I said, "Me too." My name is Hillary Whitford, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story made you feel something, anger, relief, recognition, or just the quiet understanding that you've been in a room like that too, write it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want to hear what happened to a woman whose in-laws threw her out of the house on Christmas Eve, that story's in the description below. Click it. I promise you won't regret it. Until next time. Take care of yourselves, and if someone's still telling you that you should be grateful for being mistreated, you have permission to stop listening.